I had excused myself from that particular crisis, saying, well, I'm in finance. I don't know anything about health. I'm not a counselor. There's nothing that I can do in this particular situation. And yet, having spent an afternoon with these young children, and I no longer had an excuse to say that this was for doctors or medical people. I knew that I could get involved and do something in this situation.
Welcome, everybody, to Inspired with Simon Guilbeault. It's great to be back for another, I anticipate, fantastic week of hearing inspiring good news, challenging overcoming of faith in the nitty-gritty of life. We've got Anthony Farr with us today. Welcome, Anthony.
Welcome, Simon. Great to be with you.
And Anthony is in Rwanda right now. We're hoping that the sound quality will hold out for us. Guys, I want you to picture me. This is, I think, probably, I'm guessing about 1997. I'm on the back of a donkey, sort of waddling along in the Egyptian desert. And I'm in a group with a few other tourists. And there's this guy there, and he's a great big meathead. And his I think donkey is struggling under his weight. No, that's maybe over egging it up. But there's something familiar about his eyes. And after a while chatting, I said to him, did you do all your schooling in South Africa? And he said, yes, apart from 3 years at a prep school in Buckinghamshire. And it turns out he's my tennis partner when we were 12 years old. And that is Anthony Farr. So it was a rekindle. I mean, we weren't really mates at school, were we, Anthony? But because you were the year above me. Can I brag and say that I took your crown as the tennis champion of Caldicott?
Exactly. We were too competitive to be friends, Simon.
I hope that's not bitter, any bitterness sort of being dredged out there. But it was amazing, wasn't it? And that God was definitely in that, because you then changed your holiday plans. You joined us at church in Cairo, and it was a part of your spiritual journey. You ended up back, you were in merchant banking in the city in London, and you did an HTB Alpha course. And then, I mean, I just saw your trajectory. It was stunning. You left merchant banking to go back to South Africa to be part of the transformation of your nation. And it's been beautiful to watch from a distance. You were one of my best men and at my wedding. And so precious friend, even though you're absolutely rubbish at keeping in touch. So this chat is probably the longest we'll have had in about 5 years. So I am really excited to share you and our friendship with a bigger audience. So that's a bit of context. You are the CEO of Allan and Gray Philanthropies in Africa. Most people won't be familiar with Allan and Gray unless they're South African, but he is like the Warren Buffett of South Africa. So a really minted bloke who's done very well and wants to plow back in a lot of his profits into good work. And so you represent him in Africa, and but you've got lots more to tell in terms of your journey. So listen, I mean, how would you share your testimony? Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I suppose I grew up in a nominally religious family, but more religion than actually relationship. Mm-hmm. And I was always seeking. There just needed to be an answer to how the world made sense. I couldn't believe that we just were on this earth for a few years and then died, and that was the end of it. That just, I couldn't accept that. And so was searching from a very young age. And unfortunately, in that search, I really came into some confused guidance and mentorship, and really actually became quite depressed because I wasn't led to Christ in that search, but was really led to darker places, and really actually ended up being hospitalized for depression in my teenage years as a result of the search. And so at the end of that, coming out of that, I still had this deep sense that there must be a God. Otherwise, it just I couldn't accept the meaningless of life without a God. But I didn't understand who that God was and what that God, how that God operated. And so I decided just to leave things of a spiritual nature aside, just for my own health for a period. But realizing that my seeking would continue, and then over the years, God was very gracious. I suddenly found my best friends at university were all strong Christians, and so there was this continuing. God was just on on the outskirts of my life, and I kind of came to accept that there, and believe in that there must be a God. But I really struggled with the notion of Christ. It didn't make sense to me that God Himself could have come to our planet. And so there were many other moments, including that moment in Egypt and spending time with your team at church in Cairo. But ultimately, I carried on, finished university, finished my articles as a chartered accountant, and then found myself in London as a merchant banker. But literally, it was almost as if God had ordained for some reason that the United Kingdom would be part of my salvation. And so the very first weekend I arrived in the UK, I was with some friends who were saying that they were about to go that Sunday to Holy Trinity Brompton, and I just felt excited to join them, and went to the service, and Mickey Gumbel was preaching, and as part of the service they announced an upcoming Alpha course, and I found next thing I was on this Alpha course, and really it was amazing. It was just all those last reservations, all those last misunderstandings were dismantled through that Alpha course, and finally on the weekend away, the weekend of the Holy Spirit, I just had a definitive encounter with Christ, and really have been excited to serve Him with all of my heart ever since. And that would be an overview of my testimony.
So, I mean, you're already a nice bloke, weren't you? You're a decent chap. So what was the transformation of once you actually met Christ?
Yeah, I suppose the biggest, obviously at many levels, God was operating, but I suppose one of the theologies that really struck me is this notion of if we are believers in Christ, that He has a calling for us, that He has a special plan and purpose for each one of our lives. And so I suppose part of it was coming to faith so relatively late. I really kind of was convinced that if this was true, this was true, and it had to affect everything. It couldn't just be something on the side. It had to be something that was central to who we were, and it just would change everything. And part of that was this understanding of, well, what is it then that God has us on this earth, and what is the task and assignment that He's set up for us? And so that led me on a journey to really try and kind of understand that, and ultimately led me away from merchant banking to philanthropy and being involved in those sorts of projects.
Yeah, you talk about calling, and I remember, that you were turbocharged at that time about this course that Roland Luke had developed called The Adventure of Calling, and you sort of became a real sort of dynamo in the UK trying to get people on it. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so it's part of this journey of really wanting to understand calling and purpose, and really kind of finding exactly what it was that God wanted. I was actually back from the UK on secondment in Johannesburg, and was at a church there, Rosebank Union, and there was a gentleman in that church, Roland Luke, who had developed a course called The Adventure of Living, which answered exactly this question. What is our calling from God? How does it work? Why does it seem that so many Christians couldn't answer honestly that they do believe that they are pursuing their calling, that they know what their calling is at that time? And so I met with him, and I wasn't in Johannesburg for very long, and so there wasn't a course coming up. So I said, well, how do I get this stuff in my system? And so he kindly gave me some tapes and videos to watch, and I really kind of did a private session of this course, but it really answered the questions that had been burning so deep in my heart, and I suppose I was so excited about this that it was almost like salvation. You can't just keep it inside. You just have to share it. Everyone needs to know this, and so I said, well, isn't there any way that we can take this to the United Kingdom? And so he said, well, we're not quite ready for that, but there's no reason why we can't. And so it really got him to put all of those recordings in place so that we could take it to England. And so with more kind of inexperience and naivety, just sort of went ahead and tried to get it going in England. And we started running a few courses through video, and really to this day, I could name a number of people whose lives have been significantly impacted by those courses all those years ago in England.
Yeah, I remember it, and when I was down preaching actually through you at Rosebank Union, and then Helen, Ronan's wife, interviewed me for the course, and it was. I mean, I suppose I was in the absolute sweet spot in the most dangerous country in the world, in a war zone, living out my calling, and I was just turbocharged and so excited, and I completely resonated with that idea of calling, the sweet spot of the overlap of the Venn diagram, if you like. I don't know if that's from the course, or whether that's me. I don't know. But there, 3 overlapping circles. We studied Venn diagrams, didn't we, at school? And we thought, what a shaffing waste of time this is. But this is the only purpose I found in life for a Venn diagram. It was the overlap of 3 circles. The ideal is that there's an overlap of passion, gifting, and opportunity. And you might be passionate about being a worship leader, but have a terrible voice. You're not going to end up as a worship leader, but because there's not an overlap of passion and gifting. But what we're good at, what we're passionate about, and where the opportunity is, that is the ideal for what we find. And I know I found that in the call of God in my life. In Brenda, you found it in successive chapters of your life, and I love how the Lord used you through that course, The Adventure of Living. And so I'm guessing, in terms of chronology, this is an overlap, isn't it? And that's when you found, or God found you, your new chapter to leave. Quite a radical step, I guess, being a merchant banker and then leaving that to start working in a completely different field, working with orphans. So what happened there?
Yeah, it was fairly dramatic, but really God had been very clear in showing the way. So the starting point of it was at that same time when I was in Johannesburg, because as you can imagine, I was getting more and more excited about this course, but kind of hadn't really answered the questions for myself yet. So it was really a kind of a sense of urgency and really pressing into God to understand what exactly the calling was. And so the defining moment for me actually was while I was in Johannesburg. I had the opportunity to go and visit a local orphanage. In fact, it was an orphanage run by the Salvation Army. And really, it was very simple. I was just going there for the afternoon to spend some time with these young children. But that one afternoon, that very simple afternoon, changed everything for me, because by the end of the afternoon, I understood 2 things. Firstly, I had felt, particularly around this HIV/AIDS pandemic, which you must remember in South Africa in those days was going to make 2 million children orphaned. It was the biggest crisis facing that country at that time. But I had excused myself from that particular crisis, saying, "Well, I'm in finance. I don't know anything about health. I'm not a counselor. There's nothing that I can do in this particular situation." And yet, having spent an afternoon with these young children and spending, or just really giving them my attention, by the end of that afternoon, I could see the difference in their faces. They had so little that just the attention that I was giving them, I could see the change in their face. And so I no longer had an excuse to say that this was for doctors or medical people. I knew that I could get involved and do something in the situation. But perhaps more importantly, I had fed myself the understanding that finance was a really powerful way of effecting change, and it is. Yeah. But yet, suddenly now there was this situation where a single country was going to have 2 million children that wouldn't know what it meant to have a mother or father put them into bed at night, to understand parenting as it's designed. And I just thought that we were fooling ourselves to think that South Africa could be a great nation if we didn't address that problem first. So suddenly it was a strategic issue, not just a personal revelation that I uncovered.
So you had to do something, and how did you do it?
Well, so I then ended up back in the UK, and couldn't get this afternoon out of my system. I just there was something that just had to be responded to, but really was clueless as to what to do. And so gradually we kind of got some people together, and we were very encouraged by this parable of the starfish, where it talks about an old man that's walking along the beach, and he sees a lady in the distance, and it looks like she's dancing, but as he gets closer, he sees that she's not dancing, but she's picking up and throwing these starfish into the sea. And he looks at her, and he's a little bit confused, and he says, well, what you doing? And so she says, well, can't you see I'm throwing starfish into the sea? And he says, no, I can see that you're doing that, but look, these starfish, they stretch for hundreds of meters along this beach. You're never going to make a difference. And she stopped, and she listened to him, and then she went down and she picked up another starfish, and she threw it into the sea, and said it made a difference to that one. And so that parable was incredibly motivating, because suddenly we didn't need to be paralyzed by the huge numbers of children that were going to be affected by this pandemic. But actually, if it needed to be brought back to the power of the one, and each one of us can affect that one person, and that one person can have ripple effects of its own. So it was really exciting and empowering. And really, that was the essence of Starfish, is allowing individuals that might feel that they were disconnected from this challenge to really kind of get involved. And the Starfish parable was a powerful paradigm to enable that. And so that's actually why we became known as the Starfish Foundation. And off we went in the UK, mobilizing a lot of those South Africans that had found a home in that country at that time. And really it was amazing how much traction it got quite quickly. We used to meet at the Starbucks at Parsons Green on a Monday morning before work, because it was really a collection of lawyers and bankers and accountants and consultants. So we would plot our big plans in the morning that on a Monday, and so these events and different things started to roll out. And so it was wonderful to kind of see that take flight.
And it's very clearly strategically was pitched on a secular level, wasn't it? It wasn't a Christian venture, and yet you had the extraordinary favor of God on it from the get-go, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely. I think we did feel that we wanted this to reach far and wide, and so we did make it secular, and we involved people without Christian beliefs from the beginning of Starfish. But it was just amazing how God's hand was on at every stage. Like at the beginning, we had these great ideas, we had people, but everything was going wrong. We hoped to launch at the South African High Commission, and they suddenly then decided to renovate. So the launching venue was gone. We then decided that our first event, because we wanted to make it exciting and different and interest, and get people almost redefine what it meant to be involved in charity. And so our first event was something called the Welsh Castles Relay, where people would do a running event through Wales, through all the different beautiful castles of that country. But sure enough, just as we were getting going, that there was the foot and mouth disease, and so they cancelled the event. So we didn't have a venue, we didn't have an event. And then we were saying, well, okay, if we were somehow managed to scrape together some funding from these things, what would we actually do with this money? How would we support the children? And the big charity in the UK, South African orientated for children at the time, was the Nelson Mandela's Children Fund. And so I went to meet with them, and we had a great discussion, and they were very keen to, funnily enough, to receive our funding. But at the end of the meeting, you kind of realize that we would be giving them funds, and then they would maybe write us a nice letter to thank us, but there would be no direct engagement with the projects, no understanding of the lives that were being changed. And that was the central kind of thesis of this Starfish story. So we couldn't use them. So we had no launch, no event, and no place to actually give the money if we ever raised it. And then so that's when God intervened, and I was away on a HTB prayer weekend. It's somewhere on the south coast, and as they want to do that, they wanted to do a 24-hour prayer chain. And so it was very randomly allocated in terms of who would pray when. And thankfully, I got a 6 o'clock slot in the morning, better than 2 o'clock in the morning. And I went to the slot, and this particular theme of the 6 o'clock was really around kind of social justice and outreach and stuff. So this sounded very interesting. And then it started talking about this organization, Hope HIV, which was involved with children that had been orphaned by AIDS in Africa. So now this was really starting to pique my interest. And the next thing, this video that they were showing as part of the prayer that hour started to talk about that very same orphanage that I'd spent that afternoon.
Wow.
In fact, it told the story of that very same girl, Patricia, that had changed my understanding of what was possible in the pandemic. Patricia was the girl that I had spent that afternoon with, and Patricia was the focus of this video at this weekend away. And so, it didn't take much to work out. Okay, God, you're making it exceptionally clear. Somehow I need to make contact with Hope HIV, and I met with them. There was an amazing leader, Phil Wall, from the Salvation Army, and explained what we were trying to do, and so he totally understood the vision and said, absolutely, you can give your funds to us, but we will make sure that you are able to decide directly which projects you're supporting, and you can have a direct relationship with the project that you support. And so you'll kind of have feedback. You'll understand exactly the impact that you're making, but you can do it under our umbrella. And that led to Starfish getting off the ground. And our first project was this incredible project called God's Golden Acre in KwaZulu-Natal, in the very epicenter of the pandemic in South Africa.
Yes, and I had the chance to go there with you. I've often told this story, and I would say this story has impacted, I want to say, hundreds of thousands of lives, because you took me down there. You brought me down a couple of times to some sort of preaching tours around the country in Cape Town, Joburg. And then one day you said to me, look, Simon, we've got a break in our schedule. I've got this young lad, Bongani. He is 10 years old. And he is dying of AIDS, but his dream is to see the sea before he dies. And because we had that few days off, we drove down, and Bongani, he wasn't actually a fun boy to be with, was he? Because his system was slowly shutting down. He was in pain, so he didn't say anything. He was pretty gloomy, but we had those few days, and his dream, it wasn't a big dream, just to see the sea before he died. And as we came down, a 6-hour drive from Johannesburg to Durban, and then we arrived on Durban Beach. I remember his eyes lighting up, and we put on his swimming togs and we went paddling in. And this great big crashing wave came. He was bricking himself. We got back out again, but we gave him his dream, and we had those few days. We were at God's Golden Acre with that wonderful lady. I forget her name. Was it Heidi?
Heather,
yeah, fantastic lady, and beautiful work there. But we were driving back in the evening to Johannesburg, and it was cold in the back of the truck, and And you were in the front with another friend, Pete, and I was in the back, and Bongani was next to me. And he came and sort of snuggled into the crook of my neck. I was listening to this snotty-nosed, husky-lung little boy whose system he wasn't dying on me, but he was slowly dying. And you had flummoxed me with the question, what's God's purpose in Bongani's life? And as I sort of listened to his wheezy breathing, I was so broken. But then that is the whole point of the Starfish story, isn't it? Because people can say, look around, there's so many. What's the point? Give up. What difference can you make? But no, you bend over, you pick another one up, you wang it in and say, well, it made a difference to that one, didn't it? And I love that, because we are not a statistic. God knows each one of us. He loves each one of us. And I mean, you can give me a statistic now. I wonder, over your engagement at Starfish, and it's ongoing, how many starfish did you throw back? How many people did it impact? Because God's blessing, Coca-Cola came and sponsored it and all sorts. I mean, how many people orphans were impacted through it?
Yeah, cumulatively, it's probably somewhere between 20 to 30,000 over the years, and to this day, it's still operating strongly with 12,000 children being supported right now.
Just incredible! Oh, thank you, Lord. Oh, it's just so encouraging, isn't it? And I suppose I could expect, and people might expect, well, you're riding this wave, and why not just hang on and stay doing that? But I guess you are wired as a pioneer. Ultimately, is that how you see it? And you had to move on to do something else. Your time had come to change.
Yeah, so basically, we started very much as a volunteer initiative in Starfish, and then as the momentum picked up, it became clear that someone was going to need to take this on full time. And I kind of felt this uncomfortable tap on my shoulder from God saying, well, isn't it you? And in fact, as God was wont to do, He arranged an amazing meeting, and I had this engagement with someone that was the founder of the Besom Foundation, a chap called James. And during that conversation, it was actually meant to just be advice about Starfish, but it kind of got moved into a more personal discussion. And I said to him, I'm really wrestling with this decision at the moment, because should I be going back to South Africa to really be working on Starfish full time, because that's what the organization needs. But yet I'm a banker. I'm not qualified for that, and actually I said to him, the reason is that it's actually the easiest thing in the world for me to want to go back. I mean, that's my passion. I want to go back to South Africa, but actually I'm wondering if there's so much momentum here in England. We're raising a lot of money. Maybe God wants me to be kind of the resource mobilizer for now. Yeah. And so. James listened to this very wisely, and then he said, "Well, firstly, if you're making your decisions based on the finances, I think God's going to lose interest, because the God that I know is the God of 1,000 cattle on 1,000 hill, and he can sort out the funding way more easily than you ever could. So don't drive your decisions on that basis." And then secondly, he said, I was very interested to hear you say that the easiest thing in the world would be for you to go back to South Africa, because that's your homeland and that's what you want to do. And because he said, we do a lot of work with the Besom Foundation in South Africa, and we see a lot of people wanting to help. We want to see a lot of people trying to help and making donations, but it's from a distance and it's slightly patronizing. And if I think of someone wanting to come alongside those communities and share in their pain and be the hands and feet of Christ in those communities, you might say it's an easy thing to go back, but I can't think of anything more difficult. And it was incredible. As he said that, those words just penetrated deep into my heart. And I just knew with absolutely certainty that I was ending merchant banking. I was going back to South Africa, and I was going to be volunteering full-time for Starfish. It was an amazing interaction that God ordained. And so back in South Africa, in fact, one of the great things about those early days of Starfish is that we knew nothing, because we had no experience in the field. So we wanted to try and fast track our understanding. And so one way of potentially doing that was when I went back to South Africa, I actually went and lived, as we spoke about earlier, at God's Golden Acre, at the project in the Valley of 1,000 Hills, to really try and speed up an understanding of actually what was possible in these communities and how could we best support them with the resources that we mobilizing. So I spent 9 months living at God's Golden Acre, then back to Johannesburg, which is the center of economic activity in the country. And so Starfish continued to grow. And as you mentioned, we got amazing corporate support from companies like Coca-Cola and a big retailer in South Africa called Pick n Pay. The setup in the UK continued to thrive. So people were raising funds there. We set up in the US. We started to get kind of bilateral support, so we were in all of those streams, and it was really developing really well. But there was a question that kept on gnawing me, and that was really we were really about welfare in those communities, and obviously besides spiritual transformation, if you looked at those communities and you understood that it was a vital role. We are kind of fixing the holes in society's safety blanket in terms of providing food and nutrition and clothing and basic education. It was key to their dignity and their survival. But you could imagine going back to those communities in a few years' time, and they wouldn't have been changed. They wouldn't have been transformed. Yeah. And really, the more I sort of thought about that, it really felt like it needed other elements. It needed higher levels of education. It needed enterprise. It needed people to be earning incomes, and it needed leadership. It needed people to really take initiative and make things happen. But I really had no idea how that might happen, whether that was going to be another branch of Starfish or what that would mean. And it was amazing, because it was kind of almost doing a a reversal of that initial change from banking to orphans. But now, as God does, God was sort of leading me back into a world that looked at the economic side of things as well. And so in this confusion, I remarkably, just out of nowhere, received a phone call from this Mr. Allan Gray. The founder of the largest private asset manager in Africa. And he had heard a little bit about Starfish, and he asked to meet. And so, it's not often that you get a phone call from a billionaire, and so very excited to accept his invitation, and thought that we were going to be financially secure at Starfish for the rest of the time. But as soon as I met with him, it became clear that he was very complimentary about what Starfish had done, but he was really agitated about the vision that he had for making a difference in South Africa. He'd been very philanthropically minded before, but he really was now wanting to take it to a whole nother level. But as he started speaking, basically everything he was saying was about higher levels of education. It was about enterprise. It was about leadership. And really, so, although I'd been very involved in Starfish, when he said, offered the opportunity to get involved with what he wanted to do, it was actually a surprisingly easy decision to say, yes, I'd love to be involved, and so moved to the Gray group of philanthropies with what was then called the Allan Gray Orbis Foundation.
So you were right again in the middle of that the Venn diagram, opportunity, gifting, and passion, and he was your man. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think he would share our faith, would he? But he has. But would he see God in all this?
Not explicitly, no. So that's even more amazing, that God can use resources wherever He finds them.
Yeah. And so, in terms of time frame, how many years at Starfish, and then on to Allan Gray Philanthropies? How many years there?
So it was probably about 4 years at Starfish, and then at Allan Gray, it's now over 15 years. I suppose things have changed. Initially, it was projects in South Africa, and then we stretched into some other things that we were doing, and then for the last year and a half, our family's been based in Rwanda as part of a global Allan and Jill Gray Philanthropies that has been set up in the last 4 or 5 years.
Hey folks, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I'm loving the response we're getting from across the world. It's just wonderful to see how encouraging and inspiring it is being and hitting the spot. Listen, if you are being blessed by it, I'd love it. Basically, this happens under the auspices of our ministry, Great Lakes Outreach, which works in the poorest and the hungriest country in the world, which is Burundi. We're having an incredible impact in the toughest of circumstances. We want to carry on supporting those local folks doing a great job. So if you wanted to, greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. You could make a donation there. I'd so appreciate it. Also, it's word of mouth, isn't it? So gossip these podcasts to other people, get them to subscribe, give us a great review. Absolutely wonderful. So grateful to you. So that's greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. If you want to do a monthly, a couple of quid a month, or a one-off donation, we'd be incredibly grateful. All right, now let's get back to the podcast.
So can you articulate what you were doing in South Africa? I mean, I sort of imagined you, and correct me if I'm wrong, you would sort of handpick at a young age kids of potential and basically say, we're going to invest in you and mentor you and grow you and equip you to be transformational agents in your own nation. I mean, that'd be how I understand it, but maybe that's completely wrong. You give it your version.
No, that's exactly right. So essentially the idea is that where Allan came from is that one of the issues affecting South Africa is the level of unemployment, the unacceptable levels of people that don't have meaningful employment, and over the years there's been a growing understanding that entrepreneurship is a key response to creating new jobs and creating new enterprises, and so a lot of people have got involved in entrepreneurship for that reason. But he took a much longer term view, and he said, well, that's all very well, but it's not about just supporting existing entrepreneurs. What we've got to do is we've actually got to change the system, and we've got to develop a whole cohort of new entrepreneurs, a future generation of responsible entrepreneurs that aren't driven by just their own private benefit and private gain, but are motivated by the possibilities of enterprise to improve society, entrepreneurship for the common good, for broader society. And so, but what was amazing about the vision was that he was willing to take an incredibly long-term approach to making this happen. So, as you mentioned, we choose some people in high school. The main entry point is as people join university. It's a very competitive selection process to become what are called Allan Gray Fellows, and we're selecting on the basis of those individuals that we have evidence of being extraordinarily entrepreneurial individuals and with the right responsible values to take forward this vision. And so it looks like a scholarship at university, but then it continues creating this community of like-minded individuals, understanding how they can all contribute to make a bigger and bigger difference. And so that is all happening. We set up different structures to provide captive funding for the entrepreneurs as they start their businesses. There's a whole system that's being created, and so now they're 1,500 of those individuals in that system in South Africa, and as an amazing validation of Allan's vision, in the second half of last year, South Africa had its first ever startup company that grew to a valuation of $1 billion, a so-called unicorn. And South Africa had never had a unicorn in its history before, and the co-founder of this unicorn was an Allan Gray Fellow that we had selected out of high school in 2008. So 12 years later, 12 years of pursuing consistently the vision, we have the first ever unicorn in the country.
And then hopefully he wants to plow back in some of those profits to his own nation as well.
Absolutely. So he's involved in a number of different ways in terms of different programs and projects to give back. And I mean that's been the real joy of this, is that there's, I think there's something kingdom about this vision, and it's attracted a disproportionate number of Christians. Large numbers of the team at that initial foundation were strong believers. Many of the Allan Gray Fellows would come and share their faith with me, and how this gave them an opportunity to really make an impact that they felt that God was asking them to do. So that's those sorts of communications and discussions have probably been the most rewarding of the journey so far.
Wonderful. And so you've now moved to Kigali. I mean, you've got the wrong country. You should be in Burundi. I know Burundi, well, some people won't know, but Rwanda and Burundi used to be called Rwanda-Rundi until 1962. But I'm just sorry you end up in Kigali, but not Burundi, because obviously that's my passion. But no, Kigali, beautiful place. You're there with your fabulous wife, Susanna, who hopefully I'll do a podcast sometime with her. She's an extraordinary woman of faith and gifting and vision. And you're there with your family, your children. Let's hear more about those in a sec. But what took you to Kigali?
Yeah, so the philanthropy of Mr. Gray has been extraordinary. I mean, if I just tell you one story just to lead into how we got to Kigali. So when the initial structure was set up, we had that organization was developing his Allan Gray Fellows, and it was funded. Mr. Gray sort of facilitated that 7% of the after-tax profits of this Allan Gray, the largest private asset manager in Africa, would go to support this pipeline of future responsible entrepreneurs for the common good. I mean, it was an amazing. Beautiful. 7% of after-tax profits, and then he then sold 20% of his shareholding of the business to create this fund that would be a captive fund for the Allan Gray Fellows. So as soon as they had a good enough idea, as soon as they had some traction in their business, they could come to this fund, and Allan Gray Fellows would exclusively be funded to realize the fullness of their dreams, their entrepreneurial dreams. And so that when E Squared bought the 20%, they actually had to pay for it. So they didn't have any. It was an entity that we just set up, so they had a loan for the full value of those shares, and over time they paid down that loan. But what that meant is that Allan basically had sold 20% and received the funding for those shares. And I mean, it was an extraordinary. I mean, in South African terms, it was a huge amount of money. It was over, our currency is the rand, and it was over R1 billion. So at the time, it was probably somewhere in the region of $150 million. And that's what he'd received for selling his shares after working in this business for, setting it up for over 30 years at the time. And yet, the thing that bothered him was that he was making these long-term commitments as part of this Allan Gray Fellowship, where, decades ahead, he would have an implied commitment to those individuals, and it was being funded by the profitability of the business, and the business might sort of fluctuate in terms of its profitability. And so he basically, there was a very remote prospect of decades ahead that if the company went through a bad period, the foundation wouldn't be able to honor those long-term commitments, and he simply couldn't countenance that happening. And so what he did was he gave every last cent of that somewhere in the region of $150 million to create an endowment as a financial backstop, just to make sure that the foundation would never ever not be able to honor a commitment. And at the time in South Africa, it was the largest single private philanthropic gift by an individual in the history of the country.
Yeah,
and that's the gift that he was making, just to ensure that he could honor commitments. And it was extraordinary. When we started Starfish, we would celebrate every pound that was raised, and we just really wanted to be stewards, and it was an amazing excitement. We didn't actually care about the amount; we just wanted to be amazing stewards. That every last pound that we raised would go to the children. And but there's something about the humor of God that just recognizes, and so after being so excited and being faithful with just the small, those few pounds that we were raising, only a few years later, there I was responsible for stewarding the largest single private philanthropic gift in the history of South Africa. Just really can see the hand of God.
Love it. And so good. And what I also love about you guys is that you're both, you and Susanna, you're big picture, but you're also incarnating kingdom values. So let's bring it back to ground level and family and what that looks like, because your family is different to the norm. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so you must hear more about my wife, but in our discussions, as she was very involved in communities for way longer than I'd been, and so we had a very unusual deal breaker in our sort of discussions as we started to get more serious and started contemplating spending our lives together, and that was that we both were absolutely committed to adoption. We just wanted to make sure that the other understood. We just really, with the work in Starfish and just understanding that, God has adopted each one of us, we were just sort of, and just knowing that there was such a huge number of children that would really benefit from being in a wholesome Christian family. We were totally committed to adoption. And so that was known, but we had we just kind of let that sleep for a while, and we kind of entered into our early years of marriage, and we're very busy, and so kind of children were the last thing on our minds at that stage. And then amazingly, I was taken back to where it all began. There was a Christian conference that was happening in KwaZulu-Natal. It meant that I had time while I was up there, and so I decided, okay, well, let me use that space and that time to go back to God's Called Nacre and just see how everyone's doing there. And I went and had lunch with Heather, and over lunch, she just brought through this beautiful little baby. She wasn't more than 3 or 4 months old, and I held her in my arms, and something shifted in my heart. And you must remember that having been involved with Starfish for years, I mean, holding a young baby wasn't something new. There are probably thousands, at least, that I'd kind of been engaging with over the years. But obviously, God had anointed and appointed this particular child. And I was actually on the phone to Susanna and said, I don't even remember saying it, but apparently I said to her, I'm holding our little girl, and then she kind of wasn't quite sure what was going on, and all a bit surprising. but that, there was something that shifted, and initially it was, well, we just need to take responsibility for this young girl somehow, because it was a tragic story that had led her to being looked after at God's Golden Acre, and so I was back now in Cape Town, and we were discussing and talking about what plans could we make for her, and the more we started talking about, the more we just looked each other in the eye and said, well, what about us? This has always been part of our plan. And so, I phoned one of my mentors in a bit of a panic and said, it's a chap George from an incredible ministry called Hands at Work in Africa, and I said, look, this is what's happened, but it's not a really good time. We're quite busy at work, and this is happening, and that, and he listened to me quietly, and he said, well, actually, Anthony, it's not about you. It's about this girl. And are you willing to give her everything that she deserves? And are you willing to make that sacrifice? And it was just a real reminder of what actually it was all about. And so now we were getting serious, but Susanna hadn't even met her yet, so it was a bit awkward. And so we said, okay, well, let's go up. About a month after I had first met her, we went up for the weekend, and it was all very well planned and considered and rational, that we would, Susanna would get to engage with her, we could talk about it, and we could make it, we could then sort of take a little bit of time to make a decision, and we were actually going overseas on a business trip immediately afterwards, and that's how we were going to play it. But sure enough, as the moment we arrived, the moment that our daughter Karabo was put into Susanna's arms, we just knew this is our daughter, and we are never, ever leaving her. There's no way we are leaving her, not for a moment. And so at the end of the weekend, I flew back, Susanna stayed, and kind of made panicked phone calls to my parents saying, well, what do you need for a baby? What do we need to get? And I've got good news for you. You've become grandparents.
Not how they would have liked, maybe.
And so about 2 days later, Susanna flew back, and that's our daughter.
Brilliant. And Anthony, we're running out of time, but it wasn't just your daughter, was it? It was also your son, Linda. Tell us very briefly about him.
Yeah. So we went back every year to God's Golden Acre, and then we found out that actually that there might be a relative. In fact, we received a letter from a great aunt that our soon-to-be son had written, saying, I hear I have a sister. I don't know where she is. I hear she's gone to Cape Town. How do I find her? And essentially, our son and daughter share the same maternal mother, biological mother. Mm-hmm. And so we then, by this stage, though, he was already 11 years old, but we made plans to meet him initially just to complete the understanding of our daughter. But again, the same process happened as soon as we met him, and we could see the connection between him and our daughter. We realized that God had much bigger plans. And so at the age of 11, he joined our family. So all of our, and we have a biological child, so all of our children have oldest child syndrome, but we have fun as a family despite that.
Wow. Oh, it's so good. Oh, I mean, I'm really annoyed that we haven't got more time, because there's so much more we'd like to hear on that one. But I'm going to give you just one more question, and again, it's going to have to take a brief answer, and that is that you are where you are right now. Where is all this heading? What's your vision for the future?
Yeah, so we now have the Allan and Jill Gray Philanthropies and as a vehicle, but essentially I think there's this we know that Africa is on God's heart, and we know that it is in some senses, in some parts of the continent, it's the greatest challenge, but in that greatest challenge is the greatest opportunity, and there are many things that need to happen for us to realize the fullness of Africa's potential. But one of them is really kingdom businesses. In other words, these businesses that are inspired by what is possible in unleashing the creativity, the God-given creativity that God has invested in some people to make a difference for society, to transform communities, to really bring about an understanding of what restoration we can bring to the continent through those businesses.
So good. Listen, if anyone wants to be in touch with you, or is anything you want to promote, just go for it quickly.
Yeah. Please come and find me. My email is Farr, Farr at AllanGillGrayPhilanthropies.org. And if you get the email right, you deserve to make contact.
Oh, great. Oh, Anthony, it's been such a treat. The next time I suspect we'll see each other is actually for the longest time we'll ever have had together, which will be about 10 days. And it's a chance for me to plug it. Basically each end of May, beginning of June, we do a cycling fundraiser around Burundi. For the last few years, we've done it in Rwanda because Burundi wasn't so safe. It's safe again now. Anthony is signed up, I think, for 2023. And it is an incredible experience. I say to people, I'm going to give you the best 10 days of the last 5 years. That's what I aim to do. We see our local partners. We get rock star treatment as kids pour out of schools. The teachers can't keep them in as they see these men in lycra, middle-aged men in lycra going past. It's such an extraordinary sight for them, and just great. It's a fabulous experience. So if any of you know cyclists or are cyclists and want to join us, that is each end of May, June. We do a week cycling. It's 50,000 feet elevation, so it's a good challenge. And Anthony's a bit fatter than me. He's a bit bigger. He's a number 8 in rugby, so I might be able to beat him at that as well. There's the challenge. The gauntlet has been laid down, Anthony. Get fit. And look, time's run out. Listen, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've enjoyed this podcast, guys, please give us a great rating on Spotify, iTunes. If you want to be in touch with me, it is simongilbert.com, any of the social media platforms. I want to thank Adam Thomas Steer for the editing and Mike Sanderman for the mixing. In the meantime, have a great week. We'll see you next week. Toodaloo.